A note to listeners. This episode deals with gun violence and suicide. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, help is available 24 hours a day by calling or texting the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.
Robert, this is Trooper Katz with the State Police. Can you open the door for me, please?
It's July of 2023, and a crew of New York State troopers is at a military hotel near West Point.
Thank you, my man. You want to throw a shirt on? I'll come and talk to you.
Leaders of an Army Reserve unit have called the troopers to help with a reservist who had been hearing voices and picking fights. He's locked himself in his room, and he insists that everyone, family, friends, and total strangers, are spreading lies that he's gay and a pedophile.
What was it that caused the issue last night?
They keep saying shit behind my back. I confront them, and they pretend like I'm hearing stuff.
Okay. You say that they're talking about you behind your back, but you actually hear them saying these things?
Yeah,
or
I'm hearing them, yeah.
Army Reserve Sergeant First Class Robert Card sits perched on the edge of the bed in a cinder-block room strewn with clothes and shoes. He's a 20-year veteran, lean and fit. He's wearing matching Army shorts and a t-shirt, plus a fresh buzz cut. His unit is on a 2-week training stint at West Point. Card's specialty is showing hundreds of cadets, one by one, how to toss live hand grenades. Card's mental health has been deteriorating for at least 6 months now, and something is clearly off with him this weekend.
It's happening everywhere, so
all right.
Hearing bits and pieces of all of it, and it's just getting old, and I confront people, and it doesn't stop. So.
Okay. All right, so we talked to a few of them today, and they're saying like nothing like that is happening.
The troopers tell Card that he's been directed by his reserve commanders to get a psych evaluation that very day. It's an order, not a request.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Is it going to help anything? No.
I don't know.
I would rather have people stop talking, stop looking at me, a fucking private person that don't like fucking my shit out there.
And then this exchange happens.
These guys, I mean, I hope you understand that they're concerned enough about your welfare that they called us.
Oh, because they're scared, because I'm going to friggin' do something, because I am capable.
I am capable. The state trooper seizes on that phrase.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Huh?
What do you mean by that?
Nothing. No.
Okay.
I am capable. In the months leading up to this, Robert Card had been making threats. Just about everyone he was close to was worried about him. And months later, he would go into 2 night spots in Lewiston, Maine, with an assault rifle. He'd kill 18 people and wound 13 more in the deadliest mass shooting in Maine history. 2 days later, he'd be found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This police body cam footage, released by the New York State Police in response to a public records request, is one of the only recordings of Card to surface publicly since the shooting. And when a coworker and I watch it, we both get chills hearing those words from the future gunman. Reserve First Sergeant Kelvin Moat was in the hallway that day at the hotel near West Point. He overheard what Card said.
I am capable. That was enough for me. At that moment, I decided he was going to the hospital, one way or the other.
Last episode, we heard about the missed opportunities, especially among local police, to prevent the tragedy in Lewiston In this episode, we focus on the military. I'm Kevin Miller. And for the past year, my colleagues and I have been looking into how the Army Reserve responded to the many clear warning signs about a soldier in a dangerous downward spiral. We were there as members of the Army and Army Reserve testified under oath for more than 15 hours about that July incident. We talked to dozens of people about what happened in the months before and after. We analyzed investigative reports from the Army and a state commission, and we spoke to members of Congress who were pressing the military for changes after Lewiston. Army Reserve leaders have acknowledged some failures. They've also cast blame onto local police and criticized a private psychiatric hospital. And that July morning, this could have been a turning point. Reserve unit leaders took the initiative to get CARD help, but the help never came. Instead, what followed were questionable medical decisions, months of miscommunication, and military red tape with tragic consequences. Those mistakes have raised questions about how the Army manages mental health concerns within its ranks. And it's highlighted disparities between the regular military and the reserves.
I mean, we're doing the best that we can in terms of understanding what did transpire and then make changes for the future.
It's clear that it wasn't just a hunch and that Sergeant Card had legitimate issues.
None of us should be allowed to say that we did enough in this scenario, in this situation.
From Maine Public Radio, the Portland Press Herald, and Frontline PBS, this is Breakdown, Episode 3, Dereliction of Duty. Like most reservists, members of the 3rd Battalion, 304th Infantry Regiment typically spend 1 weekend a month in uniform, plus a 2-week active training mission. For the 304th, that mission happens at West Point.
This stretch of land is part of the 16,000 acres that make up the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. It began to play a vital role in our nation's history in 1777. It was General George Washington who saw its strategic value to the lower Hudson Valley.
The 2-century-old military academy, overlooking the Hudson River, has churned out scores of future generals and even a few presidents. And for several decades now, those future military leaders learn how to literally shoot straight with help from the Maine-based 304th. Robert Card was regarded as a, quote, solid and reliable member of the unit. And an Army Reserve evaluation from earlier in 2023 described him as a, quote, consummate professional. But he had been losing his hearing for years, and Card's mental health was already on the radar of his unit leaders by the time he arrived at West Point that July. 2 months earlier, in May, a sheriff's deputy in Maine had contacted a reserve leader after Card's ex-wife and son raised concerns that he seemed to be hearing voices, and about his erratic behavior and his access to guns at home. As we heard in previous episodes, there was talk of getting him treatment and working with other family members to remove his guns. But ultimately, little was done, and Card continued showing up for drills. Yet Card had tried to get out of the West Point training. He had served 20 years in the reserve and was eligible for retirement. And Card had already accused other unit members of talking trash about him. The state troopers who showed up at Card's room that day gave him 2 options for getting to West Point's military hospital: either ride quietly with other reservists or in handcuffs with troopers.
You can go. I don't want to treat you like that.
Yeah, we don't want to do that, all right? So if you give me your word that you'll go with
20
him.
years, I shouldn't even be here. I fucking tried to get out of this fucking ET. No, you had to fucking come. Ugh.
Card is driven to the hospital in an SUV with 3 other non-commissioned officers. It's part of a 4-vehicle caravan that includes 2 state police cruisers. Card tears up at one point. He's otherwise silent as he stares out of the window. At Keller Army Community Hospital, Card tells psychiatric nurse practitioner Major Matthew Dickinson that people everywhere are talking about him, calling him a pedophile and gay. He's angry. Card doesn't make specific threats, but Dickinson remembers him saying that if people don't stop, quote, something was going to happen. Dickinson spoke publicly at a commission created by Maine's governor and attorney general that spent months looking into the shooting.
We have convened this evening for the purpose of interviewing and hearing from Major Matthew Dickinson, who I believe is with us.
For months, my colleagues and I pressed military officials for specifics about their dealings with Robert Card and his mental health treatment. They wouldn't agree to interviews, but shared general information. This past summer, they also released a 115-page internal investigation that identified multiple failures, which we'll get to a bit later. And we have hours of public testimony before the State Commission from members of the Army and Army Reserve. Major Matthew Dickinson testified that it took him less than an hour to declare Robert Card unfit for duty.
Mr. Card was exhibiting psychosis and paranoia, and I actually had safety concerns because he was actually assigned with his unit running a range where he had access to weapons and munitions. My recommendation was that he be moved to a higher level of care for further assessment.
Keller Hospital wasn't equipped at the time to offer Card the intensive, around-the-clock psychiatric care that Dickinson says he needed. So Card was transferred to a private facility called Four Winds Hospital, located about an hour away. Master Sergeant Ed Urich was attending the West Point training that weekend too.
It's clear that it wasn't just a hunch and that Sergeant Card had legitimate issues, that it was getting addressed. We're all high-fiving each other because it was the perfect scenario. We got him to where he needed to be. They identified it. Yeah, you're right. And they brought him to a place where he's supposed to be treated. We were very happy with the way it turned out as far as the unit was concerned.
Here's where things start to get murkier. We know that Card spent 19 days at the private hospital, but the details remain sketchy a year after the shooting and his suicide. That's because the Army couldn't force Four Winds Hospital to participate in its investigation. Maine Public Radio, the Portland Press Herald, and Frontlines team reached out to the hospital more than a dozen times. They responded twice, referring us to a communications staffer and an outside attorney, neither of whom replied. Members of Maine's shooting commission did talk to the psychiatrist who treated Card at Four Winds, but that questioning took place in private because, even though the former patient had died, there were, quote, legal concerns stemming from New York State's medical privacy laws. A commission spokesman also confirmed that Four Winds shared Card's medical files, but up until now, the panel hasn't released those documents publicly. In its 215-page final report, the commission devoted just a few paragraphs to Card's time at Four Winds and their interview with the psychiatrist. As for why, Commission Chairman Dan Wathen hasn't publicly said.
We set forth the facts as we determined them to be, and they're in the report. And I'd let the report speak for itself in that regard.
Here's what we do know, though, based on details in the Army and State Commission reports. Card's hospital intake paperwork said he was suffering from paranoia, psychosis, auditory hallucinations, aggression, and homicidal ideations. He also told Four Winds staff he kept a, quote, hit list. Card occasionally cooperated at Four Winds. But the Army's internal investigation shows that Card became, quote, irritable and agitated when Four Winds staff asked about the guns he had at home, at least 10 of them. He said he struggled with social anxiety and might consider taking medication. He denied any serious mental health problems, yet insisted that even hospital staff were talking about him. The State Commission report says that more than a week into his stay at Four Winds, Card let the staff know that he wanted to leave. In response, the hospital asked the court to make him stay. They wanted to involuntarily commit him, but the day before the court hearing, both Card and the hospital dropped their competing requests. So on August 3rd, Robert Card walked out of Four Winds. He had his discharge instructions, but no follow-up appointments scheduled. Had he been involuntarily committed, federal law would have prohibited Card from owning guns when he was eventually released. His sudden departure shocked many, including the Army nurse practitioner, Major Dickinson, who first evaluated him.
For me personally, yeah, sure. I was a little surprised.
And Master Sergeant Urich, who heard the news from Card's older brother, Ryan.
We thought that he was going to be there for a very long time. And when Ryan Card called me and said he was out, I said, that can't be true. And he said, actually, how naive I was. I said, well, then he's all better. And he said, no, he's still the same. And I said, I don't believe that the hospital released him the same way they got him. I just don't believe that. And he said, he is the same.
According to the state commission, Card's attending psychiatrist said she didn't think a court would agree to have him committed. Card had shown progress, said he would take his meds and participate in therapy after release. Four Winds staff worked out a, quote, safety plan with members of Card's family. However, details of that plan have not been released. They also tried several times to reach him, according to the Army report, but were not successful. One answer may come from Card himself. Sean Hodgson drove 6.5 hours from Maine to pick up his fellow reservist and friend.
Well, I thought I'd have to go talk to somebody, and I pulled up and I saw him waving through the window in the door. Thought that was odd. I was like, all right. And I parked my car, and I walked up, and they just let him out the door with his bags. And he's like, you want me to drive?
On the way home, Card bragged about playing the game to get released. He told Hodgson how he threatened to sue and how hospital staff were, quote, abusing his rights by keeping him there.
He just started telling me everything all over again and what happened in the hospital and how he pretty much played the game. And he told them straight out he knew exactly what to say to get out.
Card arrived back in Maine 20 days after he left for New York. The commission report states that, before his release, Card assured Four Winds staff that he would take the prescribed drugs, get treatment, and seek support from family and friends. But they were all empty promises. He never made any appointments and stopped taking his medications within days of getting home. Robert Card lived with his dog in Bowdoin, Maine. It's a farming community about 40 miles from Portland, but a world away, with about 3,000 people and one convenience store. Card was raised there. His family owns hundreds of acres of farmland and woods in the tight-knit community. Card got home from the hospital in New York 12 weeks before the mass shooting. He was back in civilian life. And according to the Army's own investigation, that was a failure by the military. To better understand why, I need to explain the difference between the reserves and active duty military. The regular Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard is a full-time job. You can be deployed at any time. You're subject to military law. That's why when an active duty soldier or sailor is busted for, say, drunk driving on a Saturday night, the military justice system might demote or imprison them. They could be ordered to undergo treatment or even kicked out. That's active duty. Reservists, on the other hand, are only soldiers part-time, during weekend battle assemblies or the annual 2-week training. Reservists are on duty. That means they're under the command of their unit leaders and anyone above them. But as soon as they arrive home, they become civilians again, and their reserve leaders have no real authority over them. And that's what happened with Robert Card. Card was on active duty during the 19 days he spent at the hospital. That ended when he reached his home in Maine.
the U.S. Army Reserve soldier is only in a duty status for about 38 days per year. And outside of that duty status, unit commanders have no legal authority to compel soldiers to undergo medical treatment, to execute follow-on care, or surrender personally owned weapons, regardless of the circumstances. This is a complex challenge.
Lieutenant General Jody Daniels was the top-ranking general of the U.S. Army Reserve Command in July. That's when the Army released a report after they investigated Card's case. The report found that reserve leaders or staff at Keller Army Hospital should have kept him on active duty status. Card was hospitalized for more than 24 hours while on a training mission, so under military rules, that should have triggered an investigation. If his mental illness was caused or aggravated by his service, the government should have kept paying for his care, but none of that happened. What did happen next reveals alarming gaps in the mental health support system for soldiers and their families. Roughly a week after returning home, Card stopped answering calls and messages from an Army psychological health case manager. They were supposed to keep tabs on his progress and help connect him with services. But he ignored them, and at the end of August, the case manager simply closed Card's file. The Army investigator criticized that decision. But they also acknowledged that it was entirely consistent with Army Reserve policy. At that time, the Reserve's psychological health program could close a case after 5 unsuccessful attempts to reach someone over 3 weeks. So again, 5 unanswered calls, emails, or text messages, and it's case closed.
That program is supposed to follow up with soldiers who have mental illness.
Senator Susan Collins is a senior member of Maine's congressional delegation and the top Republican on the powerful Senate committee that controls military spending. Collins says it was, quote, inexplicable that the psychological health case manager would close the case or that the policy would allow it.
And yet, to me, it's difficult to think of a greater warning sign than his failure to respond to repeated inquiries from medical professionals that suggested that he was not taking his medication and that he was not complying with the discharge orders.
Lieutenant General Daniels told reporters during the July press conference that the Army Reserve has since changed that policy in response to what happened in Maine.
Just because someone is non-responsive doesn't mean that we don't need to have additional contact with them. So we don't want to close it just because they didn't answer the phone. So we're making that change so that we can...
But the Army's own report laid out more than a half dozen other failings in the months before the mass shooting in Maine. 4 wins in the military hospital. Each thought the other was responsible for making sure Card was taking his medication and continuing therapy. The result, according to the Army investigator, was no one adequately followed up on Card's care after his release. West Point's military hospital should have formally handed off Card to his reserve unit. That's what's supposed to happen after a reservist is commanded to get a psychological evaluation, but it didn't. And the Army report says that Card's unit leaders didn't try reaching the military hospital in West Point either. And there were also delays in communication. It took the private hospital 8 days to fax Card's psychological assessment and treatment recommendations to the Army hospital. And then it took the military hospital another 10 days to upload those documents into the military health system. There were also weak links within the reserve unit's chain of command. Here again is Lieutenant General Daniels.
While unit leadership took several consistent and sustained actions to address Sergeant Card's deteriorating mental health, there were also a series of failures by unit leadership.
According to the Army investigator, Card's commanders were supposed to investigate after he was hospitalized for more than 24 hours. They should have filed a critical information report or notified the Army's insider threat program after Card threatened to shoot up the reserve complex. None of that happened. Card's commanders believed that the federal health policy law, known as HIPAA, prevented them from accessing his medical files. But it doesn't. In the end, 3 leaders of CARD's unit were charged with dereliction of duty. Their names were redacted throughout the report. And when pressed by reporters, Daniels would not elaborate on their punishments, other than to say she had taken, quote, administrative actions that could prevent those officers from advancing further in their military careers. They could also be discharged. Like the Army's internal review, the Special Commission in Maine investigating the mass shooting found plenty of fault in how the reserves handled Robert Card's deteriorating mental health. The commission created by Governor Janet Mills weeks after the shooting was stacked with retired judges, prosecutors, criminal investigators, and mental health experts. Mills, who is a former attorney general, also made sure Maine lawmakers granted the commission the power to use subpoenas to make people testify. I sat through dozens of hours of these commission hearings. They were solemn and oftentimes tense affairs. As the panel heard from law enforcement who responded to those horrific scenes and led the ensuing 2-day manhunt. They heard from people who survived the shootings and loved ones of those who didn't. And Robert Card's family testified tearfully about their unsuccessful attempts to get him help. Over a half-dozen meetings, the commission heard from members of the Army and the Army Reserve. The proceedings sometimes felt like court trials.
You swear that the testimony you will give in the matter now in hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
One by one, commanders from the Army and Army Reserve raised their right hands and swore to truthfully answer the commission's questions. Often they had military lawyers or JAG officers sitting beside or close behind. On occasion, they brought their own attorneys. Some of the tensest exchanges involved the commanding officer of Card's Reserve Unit, Captain Jeremy Reamer, who was subpoenaed twice by the commission. Member and retired judge Ellen Gorman pressed Reamer on what he should have done to ensure Card was getting help after he left the hospital.
You have said on a couple of occasions that you expected the law enforcement here in Maine to do their job.
Mhm.
Was it your job to complete the developmental counseling form?
That was a requirement of me, yes.
Did you do that?
I did not.
And was it your job to ensure that Card followed through with the mental health treatment that had been ordered him, that he had been ordered to comply with by the Army? That was your job.
It's part of my job, yes.
Did you do that?
Reamer goes quiet here. His lips move, but he hesitates as he appears to scan his memory, searching for an answer while under oath. After about 10 seconds, with a pained expression on his face, he says,
I personally did not follow up with him regarding that.
Reamer has not spoken publicly beyond the commission testimony. It did not respond to messages requesting comment for this episode. He did testify that he didn't have the power to force Card into mental health treatment, and that he believed local police and Card's family would remove Card's weapons. This exchange took place in April. And by this point, Captain Reamer was no longer leading the reserve unit. He told the commission that it was his time to cycle out of that position. Reamer is never named in the Army report. Lieutenant General Daniels said one of the 3 unit leaders punished for dereliction of duty was a captain. The reserves made other changes, big and small. As of late October, the Pentagon is still reviewing whether to stop working with Four Winds and a contracting agency for potential substandard care and for not following procedures. And no more 5 tries and you get to close a case, even if they can't reach a reservist who's in their care. Army healthcare providers have to consult with unit leaders first and notify other higher-ups before closing a case. Lieutenant General Daniels says she also directed reserve leaders to be retrained in the HIPAA health privacy law and about their options for safely storing private guns at reserve facilities.
I mean, we're doing the best that we can in terms of understanding what did transpire and then make changes for the future.
Maine Senator Angus King says the Army has, quote, made all the right noises with its planned changes. But King, who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, says he wants more than just rhetoric.
I had a call with the Secretary of Defense about a month ago, and that was my blunt message. The reports are good, the recommendations are good, but I want to be sure that the word gets down all the way to the command level, that this just isn't something that's sitting in a report somewhere in the Pentagon. So I'll reserve judgment until I see the actions that are taken as a result of all this work.
In mid-October, less than 2 weeks before the one-year anniversary of the shootings, attorneys representing dozens of survivors and families of Card's victims formally notified the federal government of their intent to sue the Army and West Point's military hospital over how the Army handled Card's deteriorating mental health. Attorney Travis Brennan.
The Army bureaucracy failed Robert Card. The Army bureaucracy failed this state and community, and it failed our clients.
Robert Card's ex-wife, Carol Lamb, is infuriated by the finger-pointing she's seen among law enforcement and reserve leaders.
None of us should be allowed to say that we did enough in this scenario, in this situation.
Lamb, along with Robert Card's son, then a high school senior, were the first to alert local police to their concerns about Card's deepening paranoia and access to guns. That was in May of 2023, more than 5.5 months before his rampage.
All of these people saying that it wasn't their job because it's such a different life between military and civilian life, that you only have so much control over the soldiers after they leave drill. But you do have a say. You do have a connection to that person still. And you have a requirement, many requirements.
In tearful testimony, other family members like Robert Card's sister, Nicole Hurling, told the State Commission that they wished the family had pushed harder, even after Card answered their knocks on his door with a gun, and especially after he gradually stopped communicating with most family members.
I acknowledge my responsibility as Robbie's sister. I wish I had done everything in my power to get him the help he needed. My pride prevented me from seeking help after facing rejection.
Hurling and her older brother, Ryan, had tried to get him into treatment. She told the State Commission about the countless hours trying to navigate the assistance programs that are supposed to be available to military personnel and their families.
Despite exhaustive online searches, I couldn't find clear information on where to report my concerns. The information I did come across was outdated, and despite leaving numerous voicemails, none were returned.
She and her husband, James, told Commission members that Card was a quiet, beloved father, brother, and uncle before something went horribly wrong in his head, before he became convinced that even his family was part of a massive conspiracy against him.
This is not an excuse for the behavior and action that Robbie committed. It was a wrongful act of evil. My brother-in-law was not this man. His brain was hijacked.
Exactly what happened to Card's brain has been the subject of a lot of debate and speculation. Maine's medical examiner sent Card's brain tissue to a lab at Boston University's medical school. that studies brain injuries among athletes like pro football players and among military personnel. The lab found Card had significant degeneration, inflammation, and damage within his brain, and those results were consistent with injuries in other veterans who were repeatedly exposed to blasts. The Boston University lab would not discuss Robert Card's brain tissue analysis for this series. In a statement earlier this year, lab director Dr. Ann McKee said she could not say with certainty that Card's behavioral changes were caused by the damage her team observed. But she added that based on the lab's previous work, quote, brain injury likely played a role in his symptoms. It's not possible, scientists say, to definitively link brain injuries to specific behaviors, but Card's family believes his injuries likely led or at least contributed to his mental health deterioration. The Army's internal investigation agrees that Card likely suffered a traumatic brain injury, but it raises a different theory. Card fell from his roof and broke his neck in 2008, the report says, quote, possibly leading to a traumatic brain injury. Military experts are still reviewing Card's case. And during her July press conference, Lieutenant General Daniels deferred to Army medical experts on the issue. But she also seemed to dismiss the possibility that hand grenade blasts may have injured Card's brain.
So the fall from the house on a ladder, I believe, is the injury that took place. The amount of exposure that he had is to other shock is relatively minor.
Since then, the Pentagon has announced new safety provisions for soldiers, including, quote, baseline cognitive assessment for all new military recruits, including reservists. Nicole Hurling told the commission that her brother may have been exposed to up to 1,000 shockwaves from grenade blasts during his years training West Point cadets. Now, she and other family members say they are working to raise awareness about mental health in military personnel and are encouraging other veterans to get involved with a national nonprofit that advocates on brain injuries. The goal is to push the military to do more to protect all service members, both during combat and training.
They fought for us. Now we fight for them. This is our call to action.
In the aftermath of the Lewiston mass shooting, Maine lawmakers passed a slate of gun reform measures. But they stopped short of overhauling the state's process for keeping guns away from dangerous people.
It wasn't the system that failed, it was the people in the system.
This tragedy was caused by a colossal failure of human judgment by several people on several occasions.
Next time on Breakdown, we'll explore the political dynamics over gun control in Maine, a place where firearms and hunting are ingrained in the state's culture and history.